Would everyone please introduce yourselves and explain what you've done in ROS past and what you're doing with ROS now? Starting with Tony.
Yes.
And if you could speak up. For those
Yeah.
Do we have a microphone?
Pass the mic around.
Who's got the mic?
Hello?
Are we?
Who took the mic?
Hello?
Is this working microphone? Yes.
There we go.
Okay, there we go.
Hi, Tony Parkanis, ex-Willow Garage intern. I'm responsible for some components of ROS, the ROS, major work on the ROS Android system, some work on testing back at Willow Garage and simulation. Right now, what I'm working on with ROS, I'm working at Stanford in Ken Salisbury's lab, Hi Ken, and I'm working on a new sort of user interface product for ROS.
Oh, that's exciting.
I'm Melanie. I worked at Willow Garage for 7 years on all sorts of things there. I was a ROS Core team member for 5 years. I mainly supported the drivers, things like that in ROS. I actually gave up all that responsibility and moved on to create Unbounded Robotics, and then, well, you all know what happened with that. And now I do some stuff with ROS. And I support other fun things. I wrote the Sphero ROS driver, so if you want a $125 robot, that's probably the best place to start.
Mike Ferguson, was also at Willow, Unbounded, other robot companies. I'm apparently one of the top 10 ROS maintainers according to ROSCon's presentation last week from the guys doing ROS metrics. So if I listed all the packages I maintained, we'll be here a while. So,
Patrick Goble, and I'm a hobby roboticist like all you guys. I did not work for Willow or Unbounded or even have the potential to work there because I'm not smart enough. But I have written 2 books on ROS. As far as I know, this was the first book on ROS, and this was written a couple years ago, ROS by example. And I highly recommend you run out and get one of those. And then I just finished the 2nd volume a couple of months ago, and it's also selling like hotcakes. But not really, but you know. And I'm going to give this one away tonight to either whoever asks the first question that can be answered in this book, or just by a random drawing.
Hi, my name is Tully Foote. I'm at OSRF, the ROS platform manager at the moment. I'm also ex-Willow Garage, been working on ROS for a long time. The first major piece of software I wrote for ROS was TF, so if any of you use that.
Hi, my name's Ralph Milk. I'm also a hobbyist robot, being a roboticist. Been coming to HBRC now for probably 4 or 5 years. I think I got involved in ROS when Willow Garage had a competition a couple of years ago to do something with a turtle bot and bring it back within 90 days. So I was selected there and did a gesture recognition using the Connect. That then didn't go very far after that. But it got me into ROS, and now I'm sort of bringing it up again with these new competitions.
Hi, I'm Steve O'Kay. I was fortunate enough to be the system administrator at Willow Garage towards the end, and had got to, my exposure from ROS was basically from a robot system and robot administrator perspective. I had to pick up and learn ROS so I could support all the work that these guys did. I actually, my one contribution is that I exposed the RPM topic to the XV11 laser driver so that it can be controlled with closed loop through software. And I built a couple ROS robots. I beat up Austin, who could be here tonight. Austin Hendricks is one of the main guys responsible for getting ROS working on ARM, like on things on platforms like the Panda board, BeagleBone Black. He's working on the Jetson board right now. So having a BeagleBone robots as a hobby, I beat up on his distro for him quite a bit.
And I'm Rohan Agarwal. I'm 13 and worked with Ross for a while, which for me is around not long for you guys compared to you guys. So basically, I have some things that I've done is I've made a couple robots myself, and then I also interned at Ologic, and technically, I guess, still interning there when I don't have school. I've built a couple robots there, and I've also worked on getting ROS working with the Project Tango phone and the Project Tango tablet, which I presented here a couple months ago.
Okay, here's the start-off question for the panel, and then people can answer it. About 4 years ago, HBRC met at Willow Garage, and the chief, CEO, Steve Cousins, compared the PR2 to the PDP-10 of robots. If we accept that as a accurate or true statement, is ROS, as it now stands, the equivalent of DCL deck command language? And, where is ROS now, and how will it evolve in the next couple of years? And will we see a ROS descendant on the personal robots of the future?
That should go to Tully.
Yes.
So that's the opening question, and you guys can answer and comment as you will.
Thanks, guys. Thanks for all the support.
Program manager.
Platform.
Oh, platform. I'm sorry.
Manager.
Yeah.
Great question, Alan.
Well, actually, we should give Ed Katz's question credit to the
Okay.
question.
Thanks, Ed.
He bugged me a couple of weeks ago. He said, "What's the future of ROS?" And so I get you guys to answer that, because I can't.
There's a great slide deck on that.
Oh.
And a video
Where?
on ROSCON. Brian posted the videos today.
Yeah. As a point, Melanie mentions, there's the ROSCON videos are all up and available, posted today. So if you were not able to make it, go to roscon.ros.org, click on the program. All the videos are linked from there. So going back to the prompt, with the early stages of ROS, I think the PR2 is actually a pretty good analogy. It was the DEC 10 was the first one that was promoted time sharing. And the PR2 also, that was one of the things that is a really good parallel. A lot of robots were single person before that. We put a lot of effort into the PR2 to make it so that you could have multi-users and switch. So we would have one robot in the room, and over the course of a day, 3 different people could work on it. In terms of the analogies to which programming language / operating system is a good analogy to the computer world, I think that looking more at the community and the development model is the best way to look at it, more than, per se, the evolution. One of the things you saw prior to ROS was there were actually a bunch of platforms out there. Some of them were open source, some of them were proprietary, but they are all relatively small development communities, very focused. And the big difference that ROS has is that it's now a much, much larger development community. In the current releases, we have 100+ maintainers releasing software for the whole different ecosystem. I just found out about this great new mapping software these guys used. I had actually not heard of that before today. So there's a large amount of stuff out there that's there, and by having this larger community, I think the best comparison is more toward Linux. I'd encourage you, if you want to go back and take a look at some of the blogs, there are some really early ROS releases that I'm sure none of you have ever heard about or seen that came out of really early. I think Mango Tango was one of them. That was in the 0 Point series that was really early developed at Willow Garage. And if you go back in the version history, you'll find out that the first version of ROS that came out was actually about the 4th or 5th version of ROS. The version history got truncated due to an incident on the server.
I had nothing to do with that. That was before my time.
Yes, that was quite a while ago. Luckily, there was an emailed copy that was backed up. But for reference, at that point, ROS fit in one email. So, I think that in terms of the different comparisons, we're trying to follow the Unix model. I think some of the earlier versions could be compared to Unix, and now we're pushing more toward the Linux model. Anyone else something to add?
I have, first of all, I hope this doesn't sound like too much of a slam or critique or anything, but looking at it, seeing ROS as like, not like as a developer, as somebody who had to install, maintain, fix to some degree, like on the PR2s, or just, refresh people's robots, refresh people's laptops as they came in from one presentation or paper and needed to go off to something else. My perspective on ROS is partially as a hobbyist and also from the work that I did at Willow of basically installing, configuring, maintaining ROS instances to some degree. What it reminds me of is, again, early Unix. I think of like early Unix or like early TCP/IP stack. From where this is code that was done by a research organization, by very smart people for certainly, like you said, time sharing. Let's do something that, let's do something interesting. Let's do something novel with networking, which was TCP back then. Let's do something novel and interesting with robots. Let's just really move things forward and make it available to people. Let's just not have proprietary interfaces to things. Let's make it accessible. And where I see ROS now is it's this research project that has grown quite a bit. The community is really growing, and it's just now kind of coming out into commercial availability. And it still has, some of its researchy rough edges, but people are moving forward with it, and they're just kind of running with it. And if you know how kind of Unix and Unix networking went in the mid 80s, through the 90s, that people just kind of got a hold of it and they took off with it. And we eventually filed off the rough edges and eventually revised it and got it really solid and working mostly well for commercial applications. So I see a pattern here, and I'm actually pretty bullish on things.
I actually have a slightly different perspective. I think to answer directly to your question, Alan, I think comparing ROS to operating systems and programming language is the wrong metaphor, because ROS is really more about communications framework, basically a message passage system and a definition of pipes between different nodes communicating to each other. And around that has grown this tremendous community of developers and users, as Tully mentioned. In fact, I have a couple of statistics from the metrics that Tully put out just a few weeks ago. On the ROS users mailing list alone, keep in mind that I think on our own mailing list, HBRC, we have 800.
It's a little over 900.
A little over 900 users.
A lot of salt. Okay.
Well, you're right. And so there are 1,758 on the ROS users list, and that basically just an announcement list. That's not a discussion list. There are something like over 4,000 ROS wiki users. There are 49,000 unique IP addresses downloading ROS packages from the dev servers. That's not even counting a ton of ROS packages like my own, none of which are Debian for because I can't get around to doing it. So it's not even counting those. In just this year, over 1,200 research papers referenced ROS. The number of robots running ROS has grown since January 2011 from 1, the PR2, to about 47. And that's probably not counting a whole bunch of homemade robots sitting in people's living rooms like my own. Or maybe it does, I think I put it up there. And on ROS Answers, or answers.ros.org, where people come just to ask basic questions about ROS, we have 18,000 questions. 5,000 return answers, so get the word, people. The wiki pages, and this is something I really want to emphasize, the wiki pages, which really kind of ties into the packages as well, the number of packages and the number of downloads. There were 14,000 wiki pages on wiki.ros.org. So when I talked about ROS as being a framework as opposed to an operating system, it's a way for all of us to kind of speak the same language at the communications level, but we can all write our packages in whatever language we want, C++, Python, and Visual Basic if you want, and yet we can still intercommunicate. And as an example, this RTAP map library is massively complex. It's a brilliant piece of programming that none of us individually or even collectively probably could have sat down and written in less than 2, 3, 4, 5 years of hard effort and possible additional university education.
Patrick,
and yet,
just to fill in,
yes,
Matthias told me it's taken 4 years to create that.
4 years to create that. I don't know who it was. Did you stumble upon it, Ralph?
And that was Victor, who's not even here.
Victor, someone else who's not here stumbled upon it. Tully, the king of ROS, along with Melody and first, literally. I mean, he's been there from day one, as is Melody. These two created the turtle bot. I know maybe not everybody in the room. That basically brought ROS to us out there in the world. And by simply knowing the few basics of ROS, Ralph was able to code a relatively simple script to match the parameters of this competition. And then all we had to do was play with the parameters of RTAP map, G-mapping, move base, all these components come directly out of the ROS environment, stick them together, and win a competition. And if a bunch of hobbyists working in their spare time can do that, I think it speaks volume about what ROS is really all about.
Yeah, I think that the fact that you guys didn't even have a robot a couple weeks ago, and then you won this competition against people I know in the community that had a good chance of winning that thing, it speaks very loudly about what ROS is capable of.
You guys
kind of speaks volumes about ROS, but also, one of the things that really that reminded me of is the way I met Mike is we met at Robo Games, and I was like, oh, you need to check out this ROS thing. Next thing I know, I find out later Mike went back to his university and basically stripped out everything that they were using and redid it all in ROS in a matter of weeks. And that, or how long was it?
Oh, it's better than that. I came back from spring break going to Robo Games, and we'd spent most of a semester using this other system, Takatsu, which was built originally for the IBOs and then transported to other things. And we'd spent most of the semester trying to bring a new robot up onto it because it was designed as a single giant binary. So every time I changed one line of code, I had to wait for this 200 and something megabyte executable to link on a little 1 gigahertz Pico ITX. So it took a while, and I went back and over a weekend basically hacked together a whole bunch of Python scripts and ROS and had a robot running around. And so we sort of redid our entire semester project in that weekend, and then that was the end of us using anything else at Albany. So, yeah. I don't know if I cut you off there.
No, that's fine. I mean, that's kind of what I see as the power of ROS, and I think Patrick's right. It's a little more than just an operating system. It really is powered by the community. And without the community and without the Open Source Robotics Foundation driving ROS forward, which is what I was pointing out about the future of ROS, if you want to know more about that, Tully and Will gave a great talk, and Dirk, about the future of ROS and where it's going, and you can watch that video on the ROSCon website to really understand what the path is and what the timeline is for improvements in ROS. And also, you should join the community. You really should join the community. There's nothing more gratifying than making something, whether it's a hobby robot or a turtle bot or writing a driver, because the minute you put it out there and you put it on GitHub you'd be amazed. Like the other day, I was looking into trying to write the Ollie driver for the new robotics product that they released, and I was, trolling the internet like everyone does, and I found someone had downloaded, a couple people had downloaded my Sphero driver and did a whole set of these like ridiculous demos with the thing, and they had all these videos, and it was very gratifying to turn around and see that people had found my stuff, because the ROS Wiki enables that. It makes it very easy for people, well, relatively easy, for people to find like RTAB or other things and get involved and take something that you've made and really bring it forward, or at least provide other tools. Like I'm planning on taking what they made and forking it into my repository as basic, like launch nodes for Sphero, so that people can get started easier with it.
Melanie brought, I just have like one really quick comment here. I have, Melanie brought up the number of people she knows who should have, were we considered fairly stiff competition. And I've tried not to be snarky about this, but I have to say that when we went to go see Matthew's paper, I ran into Jonathan Weiss in the hallways, and he was like, "Oh, what are you doing here?" I told him, "Oh, we're here for the Connect Challenge." And he's like, "Are you working with David Liu's team? Or you're not competing with him, are you?" I was like, "Well, yes, actually we are." Well, that's not a wager I would take.
He did not.
Yes, he did. And I found Greg out in the hallway, and I told him what happened. I was like, "You know what? I'm gonna make you eat those syllables."
Next question.
Yeah, next question.
Just going out to the audience at that point.
No, we passed a list of questions around. Has everyone had a chance? If you haven't had a chance to write a question, get the pad, and we'll read them.
Oh, that's right. Is that right?
Meanwhile, while we're getting some more questions,
Just a volunteer. But all.
while we're getting some more questions from the audience.
First, the top sheet.
Okay.
Could be a long Read the red one. Read the red one.
Yeah, read the red one.
Yeah, jump straight to red.
OSRF, Open Source Robotics Foundation, announced at ROSCon 2014 that they will support Qualcomm Snapdragon for Android operating system.
Is there a Qualcomm rep in the audience?
Look for the red mark.
Oh!
For ROS. Did everyone hear that? Or need to repeat it? That's not a question, it's an announcement.
The answer is yes.
While we're getting more questions, I'll ask a question. Open source software documentation always seemed to be an oxymoron to me. How is, well, besides Patrick doing great work, how is OSRF handling documentation?
Is closed source documentation any better? I mean, it's software documentation. I mean, that's probably the problem. I mean, however, the thing is, it is this community aspect, right? And so there is a wiki. Anybody can create an account. Anybody can go on and edit it. Melanie used to do all those edits back in Willow, right? I mean, like, she wrote the first draft of the wiki. Y'all are gonna have to,
Mike,
jump
first
in,
three.
right?
Yeah,
First three, okay, yeah. Well, they're really all just one big draft.
I will say this. I did write a large portion of the ROS Wiki back in the day. And I would say that Tully and the RF team have been champs in making sure that the documentation is up to date, especially in the beginner tutorials, and doing some user testing to make sure that it runs well and works well. And I would say that you have the power. And I said this 2 years ago when I gave a ROS Wiki talk about open source documentation. You have the power. Captain Planet is standing here. He's like, you have the power. And you know what? There's an edit button on that wiki. Anytime you find a problem, you can press that button. You can make an edit. So, that is my response to open source documentation.
Having just gone through all the tutorials, I do thank you. Because I know that I've been through lots of tech stuff throughout time, and I know that there's glitches and weird things, and people are talking about, Hydro versus some other thing, whatever, but basically, it's in pretty darn good shape, so I thank you for that.
I mean, with 14,000 pages, obviously, like there's a subset
I
that's
didn't read all
well
14,000.
documented, right? Yeah, and then there's lots of stuff outside of that that doesn't get as well documented. But
I thank you.
The core tutorials are pretty well kept up.
The install document for any of the distros is good enough that I was able to write a page scraping script and turn the install docs into a Docker file. And from there generate a Docker image of Hydro and Groovy and Indigo. So the documentation for installing is at least good enough to automate.
And just to follow up on Melanie's point, a lot of those wiki pages, I mean, for example, in these little books that I wrote, I completely assume the reader has already done the tutorials on the wiki, because it would take 3 volumes just to repeat what's already perfectly written there. But what I want to say is that there are tons of wiki pages way out of date from software from other third-party sources, including myself and many others in this room. And so if we don't go back and update our own pages, sometimes we just don't have the time, sometimes we've completely forgotten there's one there. That's not OS or S fault, or anybody else's except for the developer. So
There should be
there
a
are a
seal
ton
of
of pages
approval
on
on the
the
ones that you guys actually approve of. So you know the credibility.
I mean, I think I'd just like to add one comment. I do see, while ROS is still a community-based project and seen that way, that's an acceptable level of documentation. I see it could be a barrier to it being accepted in a more commercial type environment, that I think people relying on a platform for a commercial product are going to expect a guaranteed level, and how ROS evolves to support that market, I think is something we need to watch. See, Melanie had some a couple of things I can see is maybe, as you said, a core subset gets broken out and maintained, and this is your trusted. The rest is, okay, you tread on your own if you go there. I'm interested if anybody thinks there could be a model similar to we compared ROS to Linux, and what's made Linux successful is the distros. You get actually commercial companies now who've made a business model supporting and promoting Linux. Whether that model could come out of ROS as well, where you actually get commercial versions or commercially supported versions. Somebody's going to do a distro, polish it up, make sure their version is documented, and see where that goes.
Sort of following up on that, it is our vision that all the tools and everything will be available to make these sort of things happen. Right now, a lot of as Melanie mentioned, like we rely a lot on the community to keep things up to date, but it turns out that the most important thing that we do to make that happen is that we make sure that the tools are there and running and the website keeps running. And the documentation jobs run once every 3 days, so that when you make a change to the code documentation, it gets reflected up on the website. It's actually a lot of work to keep those processes running, and that's one of the things we try to do to make sure that the community can facilitate and the communication can happen between everybody, is to make sure that this infrastructure stays there and keeps running.
Still waiting.
So I can't get the page to open, but there's a nice little statistic on the donate. Oh, here it is. OSRF currently spends approximately $2,000 a month to host ROS. And they also pay people full time to do this as open source. And I think that one of the things that you need to consider is that until there's a paying community to create well-maintained documentation, you're going to get best effort and community effort. And this doesn't come for free. Someone, like, I I got paid an entire year basically to maintain the ROS wiki and the drivers. And I'm an engineer, right? And all these people sitting here are engineers, and you all know what we make. You make it, and so this isn't as you know a zero cost game. So I think that until the players step up to support ROS in that capacity, we're still going to have to, as a community, shoulder the Herculean effort it takes to maintain it.
I'm not sure if I'm allowed to mention any names, so I won't, but there is an effort underway to create a ROS curriculum at the federal, I guess at the federal education level. And this would then open the door for a lot more books, for example, written in much more detail than mine, and with a clear path from beginning to end, from beginners to intermediate to advanced. So it's not clear to me that it's even OSRF's domain or responsibility to provide that level of documentation. I think it's great that they did in the beginning, and it's more or less maintained. But at some point, as ROS continues to grow, and it seems to be kind of an open-ended future for ROS, I think it's just going to continue to snowball. I think you're going to see books all over the place. I think you're going to see course curriculum in high schools and universities. And that's one of the ways that well-maintained documentation will back it out into the public.
Okay, we have a couple more questions. Right. I think this question's from Ted. What is the one great thing you could summarize ROS 2.0 with? Is that right?
2.0.
2.0.
I didn't even know there was one.
Everything is awesome.
Supercalifragilisticexpialidocious.
The one great thing summarize ROS 2.0 with. Well, it's hard to bring it down to one thing. Let me think.
You want me to go? Because I got one.
Taking some of the, so ROS itself sort of evolved quite a bit, and there were a bunch of features that were added later on, dynamic reconfigure, actions, all those sort of things, that are really, really valuable. And in ROS 2, those are going to be first-class citizens, right? They're not going to be this weird act that's off on the side, right? And so I think you sort of unify. One of the common complaints about ROS is, well, there's just all these different things to figure out, right? And like, okay, so I've got parameters, I've got dynamic reconfigure, I've got topics, I've got services, I've got actions. Like, why are there so many different versions? And I think a lot of that'll start to go away with ROS 2 because they'll have been thought of up front, and so it'll be built in from the get-go. So I think it'll actually make ROS 2 a lot easier to use.
Is there a time frame for ROS 2 yet?
I'll leave that one to Tully. Next week, right?
Everything is awesome.
Yeah, our goal is to have a release for next May to come out in parallel with ROS Jade. So that's the timeline for upcoming release. And to go with that, we're working hard to make it so that it will be, as Steve mentioned, we'd like to make it more palatable for commercial adoption. One of the things is, as he mentioned, it came out of very much a research background, and we'd like to go back and review the fundamentals. We've learned a lot of things. ROS is now coming up on 7 years. I should do something about that the next month. And with that, we've learned a lot of lessons, and we want to take the time to review those lessons and start over from scratch, actually, and say, we're going to take all these lessons. We have the model, it works well, but if we want to go back and make some of these fundamental change, like promote things like actions, turns out that having preemptible service calls is important. Actions provide that. But if we go in and actually make the core remote procedure calls, service calls actually have the preemptibility, you won't have to have services or actions. You can just have services and services that can be preempted. And going back and actually reviewing that process, reviewing all the things that people use, what do they use most, how do they use it, and make sure that we can cover all those use cases is the important thing about ROS 2.
Okay. Yeah, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 more questions. Okay. Are there plans to add robot use cases for normal people?
Whose question is that?
They aren't in the room. that's
Can
for
you
sure.
please elaborate?
Yeah, that's what I was gonna ask.
So this is my question. So when I listen to Tully, I realize he's not a normal, what I call a normal person.
You just realized this.
I'm sorry, I don't mean it in an offensive way. I am.
That's a compliment.
People, but you know, you're not talking to like people. You're talking to engineers and stuff, right? So, do you guys have any people who actually can talk to normal people, who like people from streets, from from schools, that people who can actually find a real use for robots? I think the problem that ROS has is that we're approaching it from deeply engineering points of view and from multi-process actions and all this jargon and technical terms, but actually going like, how do you use this turtle bot? Okay, I got it, it maps and so forth, but what is the use for it? Like why would I spend thousands of dollars and what would I do?
Yeah, I understand, Alex. I think that first you need to make a separation between robots and the software that run them. The things that people want in robots, trust me, I spent about 2 years trying to figure this out. And I can tell you, they don't want a telepresence robot in their home, but they want someone they know to have one. They really want their laundry done. I'm serious. And they want their dishes done. They want their house cleaned. But can we deliver that? I don't know. And I think that people are asking these questions. It's whether we as roboticists have the capability to deliver the hardware. Most of the time, it's not a question of whether the software is capable enough. In fact, it's great that Tully is asking engineers and talking to engineers about this, because a lot of times when we solve the problems that we need to solve, ROS supporting actions as a first-class citizen is a great example of things that we need to have integrated into ROS in order to make robots work better. But it still doesn't get to the heart of the problem of what people want in their robots, and that's a really long question. Willow spent 2 years trying to ask that question, and from my perspective, got nowhere. And yeah.
I'll take that if you want.
I think one of the things here is that ROS in a lot of ways is kind of like Apache, right? And so Apache is your web server, right? And you've got, it's the tool that you need to build the application or the commercial, right? It's not going to be, if the whole application's just open source and sitting there, what are you going to build a business on, right? But if you're trying to sort of build, robots to go out there into the real world, like, can't sit down and engineer everything of robotics from the beginning, right? It's just like, if you wanted to create the greatest website in the world, you wouldn't spend all your time writing Apache, right? You'd grab something like Apache and you'd probably grab a toolkit even on top of that, right? And I think what you're actually starting to see now with the mapping and things like this is these are the toolkits on top of ROS that now start to let you get closer to applications. And there's still a lot of work in that middleware area of the, your mapping, your object detection, all the skills that are sort of building primitives that make some sort of commercial application realistic.
Is there a tight seal on that water bottle it just knocked over?
Yeah. And Alex, I would just add that I kind of struggle with that question every day, and because I'm always looking for something fun to do with the robots I have in the house. And I always thought when I started playing with ROS about 5-6 years ago, that by now my little robot, Pi Robot, would be buzzing around the room autonomously 24/7, plugging itself in and recharging, talking to me, answering the door, and things like that. Not doing the dishes, but at least being present and doing something interesting. And in fact, it just sits and stares out the window off 99.9% of the time. Because I've been writing books or playing with new software, helping in contests. So the first, just to follow up on Melanie and Mike's point, again, ROS is a framework. It's not really out there to make applications. But I personally think, in my limited experience, it has virtually all the tools now required, including inverse kinematics for multi-jointed limbs and so on for doing the dishes, loading the dishwasher. And it's up to you or me or whoever wants to develop their own personal robot or a commercial company, as far as I'm concerned, to pick an application. Pick something you want your robot to do. Even if it's just a turtle bot delivering a Danish down the hallway to your wife or your kids.
Or a cup of coffee.
Or a cup of coffee.
Or beer.
Exactly. And you can actually do that now. The pieces of ROS are there. You might have to work and dig around a little bit, but essentially it's just a Python script or something in C++, and you can glue together the mapping and the face recognition, all the parameters you need, and all the nodes you need are already written. They just need to be glued together.
It's a gift.
Patrick pretty much said what I was going to say, but I've been telling people this. I didn't want to get this across, but I've been telling people, this. They ask me because I have a lot of friends who aren't really robot geeks, and they keep seeing me playing around with this stuff, and they know that I work at Will, and they see all this stuff that Melanie, Unbounded and Ologic and these guys are doing with robots, and hey, are robots ready for me yet? And I'm like, is ROS ready? I have some very smart engineer friends, and I tell them, well, the name is actually pretty accurate. Robot operating system. It is an operating system, just like Apple DOS or DOS or Unix was. It is the foundation. You don't have to write your memory drivers anymore. You don't have to write your disk drivers anymore. You don't have to make your own keyboard anymore. What you still have to do is, all that's taken care of for you. Like you were just saying with the IK, you still have to write the applications. It is in some ways, just an operating system, and it's up to us to write the applications. You have Apache, which is an awesome web server, but just having Apache is not going to give you Amazon.
Just to exactly that point, and our competition experience, we said we wrote some code to implement the task of winning that competition. That took about 200 lines of code, because everything else was done for us in ROS. So, we wrote an application that ran the competition scenario on top of the standard ROS stack.
You know what? It's still awesome that we have all of this, because holy crap, I do not want to write my own motor control loops ever again. Just like I don't want to write my own socket drivers ever again if I never have to write MBUF handling thing in Unix again. So yeah, it's awesome, but we still have to write our applications. Robots aren't going to build themselves. Yeah.
Let's go to the next question.
I have a point.
Oh,
Okay.
yeah.
So one of the things I think is a
Not
problem
happening.
in ROS.
Not happening.
Really?
Hit the button.
Battery?
Hit the button.
Battery. All right, dead battery.
There you go.
So one of the things I think is missing in ROS is that if you notice, one of the important features we have in, say, Windows or modern Linux is that we have a window manager. We don't really have a window manager for ROS, the equivalent of that in the stack. And as a result, we don't have a sustainable solution for configuring the robot, specifying the world parameters we need to have, or specifying what actions we need to run in sequence. And we also don't have a good approach for giving goals to the robot other than write a Python script and hit enter, which is not a workable solution.
You get the book. Behavior trees. Behavior trees.
Behavior trees.
All right, we have 3 more questions. The first one's a little snarky, but why wasn't the turtle bot more successful?
I've got a new mic. You can throw the old one at someone.
I would like to start by saying the Turtlebot has been extremely successful.
Yeah.
Why wasn't it more successful? Is that snarky?
Well, I'll say this. From the minute Tully and I started working on Turtlebot, we were told to stop working on it. So that's probably one reason why it wasn't that successful.
How successful was successful? What's your sales?
We can't disclose that. No, but we're not supposed to disclose
You
that.
agree it could have been more successful?
Yes, it could have been more successful, but I think for a robot platform like what Turtlebot is, we convinced a third-party manufacturer to make a brand new custom mobile robot base for the project.
So about that?
No, we're talking about UGen, right?
Kabuki.
Kabuki base.
Oh, the new one.
Yeah, that's a big deal. I would say that it's hard to say that it wasn't successful when you can convince an outside third party.
Why wasn't it more successful?
Well, I would say that a couple things happened. Tully and I moved off the project pretty quickly. There wasn't a lot of publicity around it. And because we moved off the project very quickly and there wasn't that much publicity, we weren't able to execute a lot of the plans that we had had for creating curriculums, getting professors involved. I mean, we had big dreams actually for Turtlebot, but c'est la vie.
Well, no, Turtlebot lives. The Turtlebot lives still. I mean, but, yeah, go ahead.
So I'm actually going to say that part of it is also a lot of people when they jump into robotics at first, they want to sort of build everything, the whole thing.
Yeah.
Well, why do you have, well, I know why you have a Nito, right? But, people continue to build robots instead of just grabbing a Turtlebot, right? And they probably spent the same amount of money along the way, right? In a lot of cases, they probably spent more than if they just bought a Turtlebot, right? But they wanted the experience, they wanted to be theirs, whatever the internal reason for that, right? There's a lot of people who didn't go buy them.
Well,
But so you've got. I think that's a lot of it is that they just want to do their own thing, right? For people who want to just buy a platform and go with it, I think they're using it. They're continuing to use it. More people keep getting them. I mean, questions keep popping up on ROS Answers continually, and also on the Turtlebot SIG.
and I would say that to Mike's point, like we offered a kit because it's very hard to convince people that they like hobbyists specifically to just buy a robot that's put together. They have like this knee-jerk reaction that, oh, I didn't make this robot, I can't use it. Like they would put it in a shredder before they would use a fine robot. And so we put together the kit to try and incentivize people to feel like they had made something originally. Also, I mean,
It's also cheaper to ship that way.
but I mean,
But
at
my
the end
CS
of the,
department won't let me buy it, right? Screwdrivers, computer science students, really bad idea. Buy it fully assembled.
I mean, we got so many like. I will say this to you guys. You guys were pretty harsh when we first created the Turtlebot. You were like, oh, why doesn't it have an arm? Why didn't you do this? Why didn't you do that? And the honest answer is because we wanted people to use it. And when you have to make all this custom hardware, when you have to have all these special tools and all this stuff, it limits the user group. Maybe it's really cool and awesome to the 10 people in this room, but like Mike said, in his university lab, they don't want to have screwdrivers. And the biggest thing that we saw with the Turtlebot with the laptop on it is when they took the robot home and the laptop was already there, they could open it up and do all the work on the laptop. They didn't have to setting up ROS on your home computer is a big burden. And so it was like ROS in a robot in a box, and it just came and you could start the school year and they didn't have these issues. And so I would say that it has been very successful. It's still gaining momentum. There's a lot of papers published on it. There's about 100, which is quite a few last time I looked. And people do crazy things with them. Someone put like big paper structures on it to do HRI study. So I don't know, if you want to find out more about Turtlebot and get involved, go look at the research and join the Turtlebot SIG.
Okay, let's go on to Brendan Lake.
Just had a quick comment. Can I get the-
Go on.
Yeah.
There's a lot of really good, there's a lot of really good, there's a few good things and a lot of kind of bad things about having to shut down Willow. One of the high points was giving away all the Turtlebots, and oh my God, do you know how many people asked me when I was going around for like places to donate? They're like, can we get more? Can I have one? And this is like in the midst of like basically tearing apart this place that I really just loved. I had like this awesome like week or two where I got to I told people I got to be like the Oprah of robots. I got to go around to all these schools and clubs and go, you get a robot, 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 everybody gets robots.
No, you get a turtle on.
Okay, only two more questions. And this one is, what work is being done to run ROS as a non-Linux distributed system, i.e. fast boot, low power?
This is actually quite topical. We have an intern at OSRF right now. We have the prototype ROS 2.0 that we're working on, targeted for next May. And he actually just today got it to compile, link, and flash onto an ARM M4. Building on top of Nutix. He flashed it on. There was an issue a couple days earlier this week. We were sitting down and we're like, well, this is great. We've got, I think, 120K of RAM, and the flash image is like 200 something. But it turns out the DDS implementation we're using has multiple 64K RAM buffers pre-allocated in hard-coded in the source code. So with a little bit of tweaking on that, the size dropped down to an installable size, and it has now been installed and flashed onto an M4. So that is one of our goals of the ROS 2.0 effort, is to push ROS to a point that it can actually have a small enough footprint to run on M-series chips.
Okay.
Also, that's why Turtlebot didn't run on an ARM. We would have had to wait 3.5 years.
Last question. What is the level of adoption of ROS in commercial robot startups?
You guys dare to.
Do you know anyone know anything about commercial robot startups?
I'll start out and hand it off to you guys.
Yeah.
Just for reference, I went to Silicon Valley Robotics Investor Forum a couple weeks ago. There were 8 different startups there pitching, of which prior to this I knew that 2 of them were using ROS. But in talking to them after their pitch, I went up and actually found out that 5 out of the 8 startups were using ROS. Of those, the 3 other ones that I didn't know also didn't pitch that ROS was in. Part of their pitch was not that ROS was in it, but following up after their pitch, talking to the people, they're all saying, hey, we're using ROS under the hood, there's these great tools, we love it.
I was one of those, so. We use it.
I guess I was actually going to say about the same thing. When you're actually maintaining a whole bunch of different packages in ROS, you keep getting emails from people, and you pretty quickly find out who's using what out in the world. And there's a lot of places that are not just startups, but larger corporations as well that are using ROS in a lot of different places, and you just don't really hear a lot about it. So.
I actually have a question of my own that follows right up on that, and I'm kind of surprised it didn't come up about directly from what is the future of ROS, and that is, well, what is the alternative? And I personally don't know what I would do. Do you start from scratch and just write all your own stuff? Are there other competing systems out there for frameworks? I don't know. Tully, do you know?
In general, there's nothing with the same level of breadth that ROS has. There are smaller ones that are more focused on different areas. A common one that is used for real-time systems is ROS. It's much more focused on the lower level like real-time control level loops. But because it's focused on real-time control, it doesn't have the scalability and flexibility that ROS does. Other frameworks out there are YARP, yet another robot platform. There's OpenRTM, which is in Japan.
But what are these companies that Google has bought?
There's GhostEye.
Yeah, there's GhostEye.
There's Max kernel, that CMU thing.
Okay, there's one out of CMU.
Carbon IPC, Orca.
Carbon IPC, Orca.
The problem is if the maintainer graduates, you're all screwed.
There's another one in Korea, OpROS. not actually connected to ROS at all. The name's still pretty familiar. They're open source, but you have to email somebody to get access to the code. They will send it to you, but they don't have things like issue trackers. A lot of the open source ecosystem is the ecosystem and the community, and unfortunately they haven't been able to promote that.
So they're Betamax and you're VHS.
Like a great example of
They're DVD raw.
a great example would be Orocos. So they actually are pretty widely used in the real-time systems. But most of the people still do use ROS. But the thing about Orocos is it's really, really poorly documented. It actually had like a sister library called KDL, and it was pretty much undocumented until it became a core part of ROS, and then it was documented through ROS.
By Willow.
By Willow, yeah. But, well...
The half of it that was used by Willow was documented by Willow.
Yeah.
The other half's still in Abyss.
Yeah, I mean, that's the thing is that for everything that you guys think is bad about the ROS wiki documentation and the documentation, just go pick up one of these systems and try. Just take 4 hours, 5 hours, and just try to download some of them. I'm not even saying install them. So.
Yeah, and the one thing I'll add when you were listing off some of those names, because I did play around with some of the like outside and so on during the early phases of ROS, and one of the trends I've noticed is a lot of those systems have built ROS wrappers for their nodes and not necessarily vice versa. So there seems to be a bridging all toward the central sun, which is
King Ross.
Rohan, all right.
And the one of the other alternatives is to just use like a commercial DDS, which is basically what ROS 2.0 is going to use under the hood, right? Okay, so basically that's like it's kind of like what ROS does under the hood, which is message passing. But a lot of them have libraries that do navigation and some of the other core parts of ROS, but but then it's not like all integrated into one system. Like it's kind of like you're getting libraries from a whole bunch of different places and hoping they work together through the DDS, which is not, which is one of the alternatives to ROS. That's not, which is kind of not directly robot related, but lots of people use it for robots.
Well, let's give our panel a big hand of applause. Thank you very much.
For those of you who don't know who I am, I'm Wayne Gramlich and I'm the president. I'd like to thank Osman and Alan here for taking over for me because I couldn't get here at 7 o'clock. So I'd like to thank everybody for coming. Okay, and next October is going to be Robot Challenge Phase 3. Phase 3, October.
You know it.
And then the November meeting, I don't think we have a talk scheduled yet. We'll figure something out, I'm sure. But that's also the meeting where we elect officers for the next year. And so I have to take this very brief moment. If you're interested in being an officer of the club, come see me and see if we can figure something out, okay? So with that, thank you for coming. We're here until 10, and then you would kick everybody out into the parking lot. If it's not too cold, we talk some more. Thank you. Bye-bye.